Chapter 4. The Rush and Symbolism of Professional Wrestling. What does the VSI look like in the modern world? How does professional wrestling fit into an expression of the VSI? Trained to be. Aching joints are anaesthetised by the roar of a crowd. Pro wrestling can only be performed by one trained in the art form. The product of entertainment would seem to be important here. The participant is taking part so others can receive enjoyment. That and the fact they also receive the rush is probably what drives them. In essence, their talent allows them to give enjoyment to others, while still getting the thrill out of it themselves, coupled with the thrill that they are one of the few people able to entertain in that way. This is not to say that the art is by any means safe for a trained person. The rush may be fused with what's known as a facilitating anxiety. This is where the participant is able to turn the fear of not being able to perform into a positive, facilitating influence. Instead of paralysis, the fear helps them to achieve their goal. This may explain the athlete's need to psych themselves up, to gain and then use the fear to their advantage. The rush. This is probably the best name for describing the feeling of being under the influence of the VSI in the modern world. Once a rush is attained and maintained, it loses its value and the person is made to go further to attain an even bigger rush. For example, when considering racing, I've realised speed is like a drug, says a driver. For the participants of dangerous sports, the fact that they are being watched and cheered on by a fan base may boost their performance, allowing them to be even more athletic, or create an atmosphere that simply adds to the rush. This atmosphere will be evident to anyone who has ever attended a football match. For the watcher, the level of gratification is dependent on two things: the level of excitement produced by the performers, and the level of atmosphere or camaraderie developed by the fans, often opposing each other en masse. This heightens the sensations and the amount of tension focusing on the sport. What is the rush? If people didn't enjoy taking risks, they would never do it. So the rush is enjoyable and linked to risk-taking, danger and excitement. It has been aptly described as the wanting to attain a new experience, new emotions to conquer themselves. Could this be linked with a desire to break the strict moral code, explored in previous chapters? Quite likely, for if we examine Bataille's, Nietzsche's and especially Foucault's ideas surrounding pushing boundaries, where attaining ecstasy and frenzy as their goal is related to the feeling of elation that comes with the rush, obvious similarities become evident. The philosophers encourage pursuing curiosity and creativity, even when it is considered to be against societal values. The paper now moves away from the rush to its libido counterpart, eroticism. Foucault's statement of "be cruel" can be used to describe a situation of excitement generated by fear and danger. In your erotic play, snap on handcuffs, neck collars and chains, and in the area of imagination and fantasy, spare nothing, lest you do yourself an underservice and miss out on ecstasy. This route will not be fully developed in this paper, but it is interesting to note that as far as modern day society is concerned, the impulse seems to lie dominating in two areas. One of achieving a rush, and the other, sexual exploration, especially sadomasochism, that remain largely taboo. Both of these expressions, I believe, are linked to the VSI. Both involve pushing the boundaries of society. Both involve a sense of danger, excitement, and claim higher emotional states can be achieved. Both, I believe, can become addictive. Wishing the world away. It is likely that if you are a performer, the majority of your enjoyment comes from participating. Participation is practical and based in reality. But the majority of us are watchers. We watch because we can't participate. We either lack the ability, or we know we would suffer from a debilitating anxiety, not able to perform through real fear inhibiting us from participating. It is important to remember that just because we can't take part doesn't mean we don't want to, or that we wouldn't if we could. We all have the VSI. Although watching violent sports creates a rush, it is not always enough for the watcher. There are two things that may gratify the residue, allowing the watcher to feel the VSI is satisfied. First, participate in mock dangerous sports. One may not be able to be a wrestler, but one can certainly get a thrill out of a fairground ride. The mere simulation of violence or danger is enough to gain a thrill. Secondly, one can explore the horror genre of literature and films. Suspension of disbelief is entered into, a stage open to the imagination. Pretense, the gateway to fantasy. That is where many watchers get their enjoyment from, the mind play. They imagine they are their sporting heroes of dangerous sports. Or they imagine they are some fearless warrior, when only armed in reality with a gun that spits paint. This play is enough to satisfy the VSI. As already stated, fantasy is usually something carried out mainly by the watcher. The participant need not fantasise since they actually perform the act, although often fantasy will increase their rush as well. I believe the VSI is best expressed today in the form of sports entertainment. Professional wrestling. Like gladiators searching for direction from bloodlusting crowds, professional wrestlers often seek visual or oral approval from spectators before performing a finisher. Perhaps the most obvious and yet disguised form of these mechanisms of power, and the symbolism that allows us to interpret sport accurately, is best demonstrated in the case of professional wrestling. There is an important assumption that an uninformed watcher may jump to, primarily that professional wrestling is a sport. It's the sort of clarity that Atkinson brings us about the classification of sport. Atkinson makes it very clear that one of the earliest ways of classifying an act of athleticism as a sport is the competitive element. Professional wrestling uses sports-related violence to sell its product. You may be aware now that the understanding of something as a sport brings to it certain expectations. The audience expect to see trial, competitors following a set of rules, and the assumed motivation is to win. Equally, when they support the wrestler, it is in the hope that their favourite might catch the pinfall. The audience expect to see a winner and a loser. Pro wrestling may be accepted as a sport because it mimics the brutal physicality, intense competition, and emotional responses of true sport. But as Dwayne Johnson in his biography, and Mondak and De Grillis all highlight, modern day sports entertainment is open about the fact that the moves are choreographed. This doesn't mean that the moves are rehearsed. It still means the wrestlers could get hurt in the performance, and it could be argued increases the pressure for the performer. For unlike in sport, a set of sequences, spots, may be followed through precisely to end up with a foregone conclusion. The fact that wrestling is choreographed with spots is only relevant at this point to highlight professional wrestling as an art form of simulated violence. Atkinson admits that the cultural appeal comes because sports entertainment is presented as both sporting and exciting, creating an exciting significance, equating to the atmosphere that must be present for the VSI gratification.